everyone. Welcome to what is another edition of our Life Raft Security Spotlight. In today's session is all around executive protection for many reasons, obvious reasons. I mean, it's clear that the topic of executive safety has become an enterprise risk level issue. I will say primarily because of that in our current climate, Life Raft has worked with Rebel Global Security to produce our newly released Executive Protection Intelligence Guide, which I know some of you already have. It's accessible to all of you, and hence the reason why we're here today and talking about executive protection. Today, we'll touch a little bit about the guide, but what's most important, what I want to do is glean from the experience of my panelists who are here today from Rebel Global Security, as we look at how we build the best in breed EP program for our own corporate environment, for our tolerances. That's what I want to focus on today. So let me introduce my panelists. With me on the virtual stage is Mark Freedman, who is the founder of Rebel Global Security. Mark is a senior security intelligence leader who helps organizations rethink how they use threat intelligence to drive smarter, more proactive protection programs. And Rick Mercuri. Rick brings more than 4 decades of experience as a senior security executive and CSO for major financial institutions, where he actually directly was accountable for executive safety, and he built the kind of integrated EP programs that we see in our guide. So Rick, Mark, welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Beverly. Good to be here.
I'm going to jump right into our first question. I know we've got a lot to unpack. And Rick, this is to you. So Rick, early in the guide, you describe a threat environment that's marked with extreme political polarization, vilification of the executives, and the rise in assassinations. Of course, in the guide, you include a lot of statistics, but one stat that stood out with me was the one that said 66% of security chiefs have recently noted a rise in threats against the executive. So, Rick, against that backdrop, I'm curious to know how you've seen the conversation change at the board level and at the CEO level.
Okay, thanks, Beverly. I think one of the things for sure that we've seen is that these conversations are taking place more now than ever. We're actually hearing from our clients as well as security leaders across many different industries that CEOs and boards are far more receptive to having these conversations. And in many of these cases, it's actually the CEO and board members who are initiating the discussions. Prior to this new heightened threat environment, conversations about executive protection with CEOs and boards were pretty rare events, at least in most organizations. And that includes the organizations that I worked for. There wasn't a lot of interest. But again, with this heightened threat environment, certainly this is a big topic of discussion, and one that we're seeing is sustaining. You know, it started after the murder of Brian Thompson, and it's still a hot topic today. It's been quite a while since that event. High-profile executives are starting to recognize, or are already recognizing, their vulnerabilities, especially when it has to do with their exposure, whether it be at public events, in the media, or on social media. They're now seeking advice to better understand the threats and what measures can be taken to protect them and their families.
That's a good point. I do have a follow-up to that, but I'm going to jump to another question to Mark first, and then I'm going to come back to you, Rick, to explore what you've said a bit more. Mark, this question that I'm going to lob at you is actually quite timely considering what's happening on the global landscape. With geopolitical volatility and domestic extremism on the rise, and polarized politics just increasing wherever you go, regardless of what country I think you're in right now. I'm wondering what new threat vectors do threat intelligence teams or EP teams need to be mindful of or have on their radar now that maybe 6.5 years ago they didn't need to?
Yeah, thanks, Beverly. So Obviously, the Brian Thompson murder is, I would say, an anchor point in the guide, and very much so for where we are in the state of EP efforts across the industry today. What got less attention at the time, but happened within a year prior of the Brian Thompson murder, was the attempted assassination of Armin Paperger, who's the CEO of Rheinmetall, a European arms manufacturing company. Now, this got less attention because, at least here, it wasn't in the United States, so in the U.S. press environment, got less attention. Also, it was unsuccessful. He wasn't killed. So that's the main reason it got less attention. But we do reference that in the report. And I think that companies, especially with what is going on right now, as you mentioned, Beverly, they need to be aware of the rise of geopolitical executive protection threats. So, in the case of Paperger, Rheinmetall is a company that was supplying arms and munitions to the Ukrainians. And so that company came up on the Russian target list, clearly. And the Russians had an interest in taking direct lethal action against that CEO. So the lesson here is that if you're a company that operates in any sort of sensitive sector, and that list of sectors is rapidly growing, right? It's not just defense anymore. Now it's energy, critical minerals, AI, technology,
Finance.
Finance. You could pick any number of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors in this country, really, which of course finance is one of. If you're a CEO operating in that space, you need to be aware that your company may be perceived as a threat to foreign adversaries of the United States. And, the list of top adversaries that we've operated off of for the last many years is Russia, of course, China, North Korea, and, of course, Iran. And so with what's going on right now, it is very much in the Iranian playbook to look at assassination as a tool that they would employ. Some of your listeners may remember, this goes back almost 20 years now, that the Iranians tried to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C., right near where I live, actually. They tried to blow up a restaurant that they thought that he would be attending. So that's in the playbook. And right now we are at the most sensitive moment for those types of attacks. And so executives and their companies and their intel teams need to be watching that very, very closely now and for the next year.
It does add like a whole other layer to the program, and something else to be mindful of. Rick, this is the follow-up to kind of build upon what you were talking about originally. What I like about what you've done, what you and Mark have done in this guide, is you weren't biased. And by that, I mean, you pulled in a bunch of other resources that exist on the topic. So as a CEO or a CSO or a practitioner, reading this intelligence guide that you've helped us put together, you can then go on and pull on other resources, which I love that. But there's one thing for me to read all these resources, be very educated, and build what I think is the best in breed program for my local environment in my corporation. But now what I want to ask you, Rick, so I've done this great work and I've got a lovely program. How now do I go and show the effectiveness of my program to the board and to the business leaders that I work with when they're accustomed to measuring things based on KPIs and ROI? And I don't think on their dashboard right now, there's not a line item that says nothing bad happened. Check. How do I speak their language to show the value of what I've produced?
Well, if you take this, it's kind of starting from the legal aspects of it and standards that are out there. The fact that there's now a recognized industry standard for executive protection, kind of coupled with longstanding legal duty of care obligations, this fundamentally changes the expectations of organizations, at least from a legal standpoint. However, it's still challenging to convince leadership to accept and invest in executive protection. And oftentimes, as you mentioned, it's difficult to, build that business case. The best approach really starts with intelligence, understanding how real world threats can impact the executives and leveraging this information in structured ways to support decision making. You can then leverage this information as part of a threat assessment against identified vulnerabilities. And it will be kind of at this point, you'll be able to deliver that more effective and impactful message to executives. So they really understand the full scope of the threats, the vulnerabilities, and how it could potentially impact them, their families, and the organization as a whole. So if you do this right, leadership will eventually come to rely on security teams for intelligence updates, and will really appreciate how you make those decisions based on fundamental security and risk management approaches.
Thank you. Do you think it's getting slightly easier now based on the threat environment to prove value in the program?
Yes, I believe it is easier because we're now seeing real world threats, that more real world threats that are starting to impact organizations as well as their executives. And I think that's made a big difference. So that's what I'm seeing. Again, what we're seeing or hearing anyway from our clients as well as other security professionals out there across many different industries. That seems to be the case.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Mark, I want to roll into some of those nuggets that people can walk away with as I'm mindful of time. In the heart of the intelligence guide that we've put together is the whole EP intelligence and threat assessment manual. And it's built around the 6 steps of the intelligence cycle. So what I want to ask you, Mark, if a team can only change 2 habits, 1 or 2 habits this quarter, which phases, or next quarter, I should say, which phases should they tackle first? And let me know why.
Yeah, we don't want to have them do anything this quarter. There's only like a week and a half left. Let's push it to Q2. So I would focus in really primarily on the first phase of the cycle, the planning phase. I think that often gets short shrift because if you're an intelligence analyst or operator, you're very focused on the kind of day-to-day. What sources am I pulling in? What are we doing with this information? Writing reports. And I think sometimes, as with any job, you can get so consumed in the day-to-day that you sort of lose the script. And so therefore, setting aside some time to plan what the intelligence requirements are, how your intelligence program is currently servicing those requirements, and where things may need to adapt. And in terms of what that planning could look like, I mean, read the guide, download the guide, read the guide, because it's got some very specific guidance and tips in there. But in my mind, two things come to mind right away when it comes to planning, especially in this environment. One is engage with your stakeholders. At the end of the day, as an intelligence professional, you are producing intelligence that is going to be read and consumed by somebody else. And I know this firsthand because I didn't, when I was in government, I wasn't in the intelligence community. I wasn't a developer of intelligence. I was a consumer of intelligence. And so I know what it's like to read intelligence that's useful and read intelligence that I wish I hadn't spent the hour reading. So engage with those stakeholders, people like me who may not be doing the analysis, but they're going to be consuming it and acting on it, understand what they really need and make sure that informs what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then the second part of planning, again, going back to what I was talking about before, we're just in such a volatile environment right now. Scenario planning to start to think about, well, okay, we actually didn't have an intelligence requirement related to IRGC, that's Iranian Revolutionary National Guard or Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC threats to our company 4 months ago when we did our planning process. Okay. And we're not scheduled to do another planning cycle until the beginning of 2027. Well, you might want to spend a few minutes thinking through whether there are any exposure points there that you need to think about. And then secondly, really quickly, I mean, obviously analysis. I mean, it is in so many ways the engine of the intelligence cycle. And so if you can find little ways to tweak that and improve that and apply that continual improvement mindset to analysis, that's also really important.
That's key. And I do know in the guide, you guys do mention that as things change around your environment, you've got to go back to the table again to reassess. And so as you mentioned, going back and taking a look at your planning cycle and seeing if you need to change anything. So that's a good point to raise. Rick, I want to be mindful of the fact that it isn't one size fits all out there in terms of what people are producing or who they're protecting or their executive program and what their environment can handle. So I've got a question for you, which is, for organizations that can't afford a fully loaded and staffed executive protection detail, what does the minimum viable program look like that can still be defensible to shareholders and regulators?
That's a great question, and one that a lot of organizations struggle with. Not every CEO requires a contingent of armed bodyguards and armored vehicles. Large scale executive protection programs can be very expensive, but the cost of doing nothing can be catastrophic. So there has to be some approach. And sometimes building a program requires an incremental approach. And for a number of reasons. One, certainly budget comes into play. There's also the comfort level. Oftentimes, very senior executives are reluctant to have that security. Sometimes they feel funny about having that, not everybody else in the company has that level. Why should I have it? I've even had some executives tell me that, I'm street savvy. I grew up in a tough section of town. I can handle myself. These types of things. So there's a number of different things that kind of drive this. But I think the big thing to remember is really looking at the program holistically, but narrowing down on this incremental approach and leveraging the intelligence. And so if you're intelligence led and you're really driving the program based on the immediate vulnerabilities that are identified, and that's really going to be key. But to do that, you have to have that intelligence capability. It's very important to have that built into the program, as well as having a good platform with open source intelligence and analytics. So you'll be able to identify what the threats are and then be able to rate those to determine what needs to be tackled first. So I think that's really the approach at this point. So I'll give an example. When I've used the incremental approach many times throughout my career, and certainly the intelligence has helped build that business case sufficiently enough that the executives understood very clearly the threats that they were up against and what needed to be done. And at that point, as a result of that, I was able to incorporate a set of next steps and a set of measures that could be taken right away for fairly low cost, something that was accepted by everyone. So, for example, in one organization, we were able to get some executive security staff within the executive suite. We were able to hire and train some security drivers to cover their transportation. And we also focused a lot of effort around their homes to install and put, very robust security systems within their residence. So that was kind of that first step. We covered a lot of risk right there. And then down the road, maybe, and again, we looked at that kind of as a 3-year plan. So down the road, maybe year two, you add more to that process. In between all of that, you're developing the policies, the procedures, the programs such as travel security, general awareness. All of those things can be done for very low cost. So it's all about identifying the more immediate threats, dealing with those, and then begin to build that program. Lastly, and I think this is most important, I mentioned it earlier, is the comfort level. I found that executives, once they have a little bit of security, and as long as it works well and everyone's doing what they're supposed to do, what will happen is the executives begin to become very comfortable with it. So asking for more is usually not that big of a deal.
I like that. And I like the incremental approach too. That's very practical. Okay, I have a bunch more questions for you guys, but we're at time, but I want to ask this one more before I let you go. But everybody, you all have access to the guide, and I think there's a QR code that will show at the end where you can grab the guide. But listen, real quick, both of you, looking ahead, what is the one capability you think every serious organization should plan to build in the next 12 to 24 months, keeping in mind, Rick, your incremental policy? What's the one thing they should do, to keep their executives protection program relevant, whether it's a process, a technology, or a new kind of partnership? Mark, do you want to weigh in first?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give an answer. I don't think it'll be a surprising one based on, what we've said over the last 20 or so minutes. The intelligence capability, I think. I mean, I think what we found after United Healthcare was that there was a strong knee-jerk reaction where either executives or their security teams or security teams responding to executives said, well, they want a security detail, or they want cameras at the home, or whatever. And that's just not informed by anything in many cases, aside from fear and reactivity. So the intelligence capability is what tells you whether a camera at the home is actually appropriate, or whether a security detail is called for. Focus on building out the intelligence capability, and the EP program will follow in a methodical way.
That makes sense. Rick, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I agree with Mark. Transforming your organization's intelligence capability. First of all, having it, as Mark pointed out, but really transforming it into a truly intelligence-led security function. I always like to use that word when I'm designing or building security functions for organizations. Is it truly intelligence-led? So shifting from a reactive decision-making to a disciplined, threat-driven model where every strategy, investment, protective measure is kind of anchored in that real-world risk. So I think that would be the number one thing, taking that intelligence and then bringing it out, projecting that out across the entire security program, well beyond executive security. That includes all aspects of security within your organization.
Thank you. This is really useful and informative, from geopolitics and how that impacts travel security to intelligence and the importance of that in the life cycle. Thank you both very much for being here on our spotlight today and being our panelists. We appreciate it. And thank you, everybody who tuned in. Of course, this is going to be up on our LinkedIn page, so you can come back and watch it again. I'll close with that and get our closing screen up there with the QR code so that you can download the guide. Thank you.
Thanks, Beverly.
Thank you, Beverly.